Last week, we covered one of the most important battles of the Pacific War, the milestone that stopped the expansion of the Japanese Empire and allowed the Americans to go on the offensive for the first time in the war. But concurrent to the Battle of Midway and the death of the first Kido Butai, Admiral Yamamoto had devised a plan to strike Dutch Harbor and invade the first territory in North America, the Aleutian Islands. With huge resources allocated to this operation, the American defenders in Alaska were about to meet one of the most significant invasion forces this soil would ever see. So join us as we delve deeper into the struggle for Alaska and the Aleutian Islands. There are of course countless other battles you might be interested in, and luckily our sponsor Magellan TV, the documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers, brings you the Battlefields of the World Wars series. In 8 fully realized documentaries, they investigate the tactics, technology, legends, and hidden truths of climatic 20th century battles to reveal just what happened and why. From Verdun to the Bulge, learn the deep and often enigmatic causes that separated victory and defeat and sealed the fate of soldiers and governments alike. And there's no shortage of similar content on Magellan TV. They boast the richest and most varied history content available anywhere, covering everything from ancient to modern eras, wars, biographies, and the Earth itself. Aside from history, they've got extensive collections of science, true crime, travel, and other documentaries. They add 15 or more hours of 4K high-definition content every week for their subscribers at no extra cost. It's all viewable anytime, anywhere, on televisions, laptops, mobile devices, and more. Get access to 3,500 hours of ad-free documentaries for only $4.99 a month, and get a month for free by subscribing to Magellan TV via our link in the description. Since the early planning of the Pacific War, Alaska, and the Aleutian Islands in particular, were seen as important staging grounds for dangerous invasion prospects, both by Japanese and American strategists. As we'll recall, the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty banned military bases and fortifications all across the Pacific, including both the Kuril Islands and the Western Aleutians in the North Pacific. This had left the American northern flank extremely vulnerable, with people in the US believing that Alaska could be taken almost overnight by a hostile force. By 1940, with the threat of war with Japan looming on the horizon, the American government had begun efforts to fortify and reinforce Alaska with the allocation of $350 million for defense, the arrival of the 4th Regiment, and the construction of military bases across the territory. Under the leadership of Lieutenant General John DeWitt, the Western Defense Command would be established to protect the Pacific coast, nominating the unorthodox Colonel Simon Buckner Jr. to command the defense of Alaska. Buckner's main priority was to construct an adequate air force, and as such, he began to illegally build airfields in the Aleutians via funds he had embezzled. He would succeed, and by the start of the war, the now Major General Buckner had 5 operational airfields and some 22,000 Army personnel. In the meantime, the Alaskan Navy was assigned a small force of World War I era destroyers, requisitioned Coast Guard cutters, and S-boat submarines, while a small force of outdated P-36 Hawks, short-in-range P-40 Warhawks, and obsolete B-18 Bolos was delivered to the Alaskan Air Force. Within months of Pearl Harbor, however, the hard-working Buckner now boasted 14 operational military bases and 30 operable airfields, supporting 45,000 Army personnel, 4 infantry regiments, 3 coast artillery regiments, and a tank company. Additionally, Brigadier General William Butler was put in command of the recently established 11th Air Force, consisting of some 95 fighters and 46 bombers. As for the Japanese, as we've already seen, Admiral Yamamoto had decided to launch an invasion of the Aleutians and a strike at Dutch Harbor that was going to be executed concurrently with the invasion of Midway. Operation AL was thus assigned to an overwhelming naval force under Admiral Hosagaya of the 5th Fleet, divided into several smaller forces that included the 2nd Kido Butai of Rear Admiral Kakuta Kekuji, 2 invasion fleets mainly built around light cruisers and destroyers, a submarine detachment, a seaplane tender force, Hosogaya's main fleet built around the heavy cruiser Nachi, and a distant covering force under Vice Admiral Takasu Shiro. We've previously said that this operation was used by Yamamoto to disperse his forces, in that regard giving the Americans the notion that they were not going to be terribly overwhelmed if they chose to meet the Japanese in battle at Midway. But the Aleutians also held another valuable purpose. They could cover the northern flank of Midway once it was taken, and could also completely shield Japan from any future American strike similar to that of the Doolittle Raid. At least this is what modern historians believe nowadays, since in the past, historians tended to portray the operation as a feint to lure the American carriers away from Midway. Just as it had been done with Operation MI, American cryptanalysts and codebreakers had deciphered the Japanese plans for an offensive against the Aleutians, concluding it was a diversion from the main attack against Midway. Admiral Nimitz then decided accordingly to leave Aleutian defense to the local Alaskan forces, while the bulk of the Pacific Fleet was directed to ambush the enemy at Midway. Yet he ended up sending Rear Admiral Robert Theobald's Task Force 8 out of a personal recommendation from Admiral King. Built around 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and a variety of destroyers, submarines, and other naval units, Task Force 8 had the mission to defend the North Pacific area, to which it arrived on May 27th. Theobald and Buckner would have to work side by side to oppose the Japanese landings and to reverse the gains achieved by the enemy. By May 25th, Hosogaya's northern force had been assembled at the Ominato Naval Base, departing towards its objectives 1 day later. The Japanese would invade Kiska Island with 1,260 SNLF Marines, while the North Seas Detachment of Major Hazumi Matsutoshi, consisting of 1,200 troops of the 301st Independent Battalion, was charged with the occupation of the islands of Attu and Edek. At this point, American intelligence had successfully identified Kiska and Attu as the first objectives of the invasion, yet Admiral Theobald disregarded this information, believing these islands were too worthless to warrant an invasion, and therefore choosing to defend Dutch Harbour instead. He then departed Kodiak on June 1st, heading to a position 500 miles east of Unalaska, although he was unable to do much due to the strict radio silence imposed for the Battle of Midway. By the night of June 2nd, Kakuta's carriers had gotten to their launch point, 165 miles south of Dutch Harbour. They had been concealed by the dense fog of the Pacific coast under a cold weather of around -13 Celsius. On June 3rd, 8 minutes before the northern summer's local sunrise, Kakuta had decided to launch his strike with some 46 aircraft, led by Lieutenant Abe Zenji, yet he was still worried that his pilots might not know how to return to their carriers due to the heavy weather. Prevented by the thick fog from flying in formation, the planes had to make their individual way towards their objective, but their flight was suddenly stopped when experienced Abe, who had taken part in the strikes at Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean, detected that the overcast was too low for effective dive bombing. Thus, 15 dive bombers and 11 Zeros aborted the strike, leaving only 19 aircraft under the command of Lieutenant Samajima Hiroichi to execute the attack on Dutch Harbor. The Japanese were expecting almost no resistance, yet to their surprise, they would be met by US fighters from Cold Bay and by several coastal artillery batteries. Furthermore, the defenders had been expecting a strike for several days, so they duly went to general quarters an hour before the detection of the Japanese aircraft, which was carried out by the seaplane tender Gillis around 0540. 5 minutes later, the Zeros finally appeared and made a strafing pass of Dutch Harbour's facilities, destroying one PBY Catalina that was trying to get in the air. Immediately, anti-aircraft fire erupted from the coastal artillery and from the vessels in the harbour, yet they couldn't prevent the enemy bombers from dropping their deadly load over Fort Meares's installations. 16 bombs managed to destroy 3 warehouses, 2 barracks and 3 Quonset huts, while the next 6 drops were accidentally delivered over Mount Ballyhoo without achieving much damage. The following 6 bombs knocked out a radio transmitter and destroyed another Quonset hut, and the final 6 drops hit a fire watcher's bunker, an army truck, and some naval facilities at Powerhouse Hill. All in all, Only superficial damage had been achieved, and the vessels at harbour, although detected, hadn't been damaged. With this strike over, Samejima led his torpedo bombers northwards, missing the appearance of Cold Bay's Warhawks by 10 minutes. Upon learning that there were destroyers at Dutch Harbour, Kakuta decided to dispatch a second wave of 33 aircraft to destroy these ships. But the immense coldness of the weather iced up the plane's carburetors, forcing them to return to their carriers. Additionally, 4 Type 97 EA-10 float planes from the cruisers Mayer and Tekau were launched, but they were discovered by Umnak's Warhawks and suffered 2 losses in the struggle. In the following hours, Kakuta's carriers were spotted by 2 PBYs, yet their transmissions didn't reach Dutch Harbour and they were quickly shot down. The Japanese admiral now had to turn southeast to support the invasion of Adak, but he was disappointed with his Dutch Harbour strike and ended up deciding to launch a second attack instead. On the morning of June 4th, however, this time 2 PBYs would get to actually report Kakuta's location before getting destroyed. 6 Marauder bombers from Umnak and 6 from Cold Bay were launched to strike at the Japanese carriers, but they were thwarted by the heavy fog and had to abort. Only 1 B-26, under Captain George Thornborough, kept on and managed to find the enemy, but he was shot down without achieving any hits. In the afternoon, 2 B-17s and Captain Robert Miles's Marauders from Umnak also managed to find Kakuta's carriers, though their attacks were very unsuccessful as well. At 1600, all preparations were finally ready, and Kakuta was at last able to launch his second strike on Dutch Harbour with some 30 aircraft under the command of Lieutenant Abe. By 1740, the Japanese planes started to appear on the horizon and got to destroy 1 PBY that was intercepted on their route. Just 15 minutes later, Abe's dive bombers began to attack Dutch Harbour's facilities, managing to destroy 4 brand new 6,666 barrel steel fuel tanks, some 22,000 barrels of fuel, and the merchantman Northwestern. This attack was followed by Lieutenant Masatake Yamagami's torpedo bombers, which blew a hole in the top of the seaplane hangar at Mount Ballyhoo, destroyed an anti-aircraft gun, and severely damaged an ammunition store before departing around 1830. At this point, some Warhawks from Port Glen had come to meet them, resulting in a struggle that ended with 1 Japanese dive bomber and 2 P-40s destroyed. Concurrent to the second attack on Dutch Harbour, the Battle of Midway had developed unfavourably for the Japanese, resulting in the almost complete destruction of the 1st Kido Butai. Alarmed about his failure to decisively defeat the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Yamamoto had ordered the 2nd Kido Butai southwards to join the carrier Hiryu in its final efforts to destroy the American forces. But Kakuta was already committed in his strike on Dutch Harbour, knowing full well that his carriers had to refuel, and that they couldn't get to the battlefield quickly enough. After conducting a successful refueling during the night, Kakuta's 2nd Kido Butai commenced its travel southwards on the morning of June 5th, but they would be promptly stopped by Yamamoto, who by now had realized that the Midway disaster was unsalvageable. While the Japanese forces retreated and Kakuta advanced to rendezvous with Hosogaya's fleet, Theobald and Butler decided to launch a worthless scouting operation over the empty Bering Sea, believing that an invasion of Dutch Harbour was imminent. With the American airbase at Umnak revealed, the invasion of the nearby Adak Island was also discarded, yet Yamamoto decided to go on with the invasions of Kiska and Attu anyway. On the night of June 6th, the 1,260 SNLF Marines of Commander Mukai Nifumi were put ashore at Kiska's Reynard Cove and rapidly managed to advance south towards the harbour. By 02:15 on June 7th, the 10 American sailors deployed at a weather station on Kiska Harbour were startled awake by the overwhelming attack of the Japanese forces. 8 of them managed to escape into the mountainside and survived for a couple of days under dastardly cold weather, but in the end they eventually had to surrender. At the same time that the Japanese were capturing Kiska, Major Hazumi's North Seas detachment was landing at Holt's Bay. They faced no resistance, only the difficult task of climbing the snow-covered Holt's Bay Chichagov Harbour Pass, and soon the island was taken and its 44 inhabitants were turned into war prisoners. With Operation AL concluded, Yamamoto dispatched a strong fleet to support Kakuta and the Japanese forces at the Aleutians. Meanwhile, with the Battle of Midway also over, Admiral Nimitz had decided to refit the aircraft of Admiral Sperance's Task Force 16, and then sent them northward to hunt down the second Kido Butai. But just as Speranze had gotten halfway to his objective, the American reconnaissance managed to discover the Japanese presence on the islands of Kiska and Attu. Nimitz feared that the Japanese land-based aircraft could be waiting for the American carriers, so he decided to recall Sperance's task force and not risk getting into a possible enemy trap. The Japanese then began to turn the islands of Kiska and Attu into their major bastions in the North Pacific, bringing a wide array of aircraft, midget submarines, coastal defense and anti-aircraft guns. In response, the Americans decided to evacuate the western Aleutians, interning some 881 native Aleuts in relocation camps in southeastern Alaska and burning their villages to the ground so the enemy could not use them for shelter. Although the Midway operation had been a disaster, with the full extent of it being concealed from the public, the Japanese had managed to secure a foothold in North America, something that caused great concern amongst the American population. But as Buckner said, having in mind the hostility of both the unforgiving terrain and of the staunch American defenders, if the Japanese come, they may get a foothold, but it will be their children who get as far as Anchorage and their grandchildren who'll make it to the States, and by then they'll all be American citizens anyway. With the Japanese fortifying their newly conquered islands, Buckner, Theobald and Butler wouldn't sit idly by either. A grim long-range air-sea war of attrition would thus begin, lasting for some 11 months, in which the US was in no position to launch a major offensive and recapture the Aleutians. Fittingly dubbed the 1,000-Mile War, the Americans would launch approximately a dozen different air raids over Kiska in the month of June alone, including the 3-day Kiska Blitz. Furthermore, on June 20th, American intelligence detected Kakuta's carrier force re-entering the Bering Sea and believed that it was a renewed invasion of Alaska. This prompted the execution of Operation Bingo, the first mass airlift in US history, in which 140 cargo planes worth of reinforcements were brought to Alaska through 46 seized civilian aircraft. Although Buckner wasn't ready yet to recapture his lost territories, he had now been sufficiently reinforced to completely hold Alaska against any force that the Japanese could throw at him. Next week, we're going to turn southwards to cover the disastrous attack on Sydney Harbour and the key role of the Japanese midget submarines during the war. If you want to be notified about this episode, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.